Welcome, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Annika Verdi, and I am the director of the Joseph A. Onanue Latino Institute. I can see that everyone is dialing in and hopping in right now, so welcome. The Institute provides scholarships, cultural programming, and professional development to students across campus, and this event is part of the university's Hispanic Heritage Month celebration, which you can learn about by scanning the QR code on screen. I'd like to give a shout out to our on-campus co-sponsors who encourage students and the university community to attend tonight, and a special shout out to these comic book stores, Eastside Mags and Nirvana Comics, who were excited to support this event. Tomorrow afternoon, Adelante is doing an event, so if you're able to hop on, we definitely encourage you to do so. The event is called Y tú quién eres, and it'll be the ending of our Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. So tonight we welcome you to Making Comics, the Future of Representation, where you will hear leading experts in the comic book industry to discuss the impact of diversifying the characters, storylines, and illustrations they create. They've probably worked on some of your favorite characters. So during the event, we encourage everyone on the call to use the chat box feature to ask questions or share your opinion. We will be dropping quick engagement questions during the conversation, and there will be a Q&A at the end of the panel. So please ensure you use your raise hand option if you'd like to ask a question. So without further ado, our moderator tonight is Ricardo Serrano Dennis. Ricky is a contributing writer for Comic Beats and Graphic Policy. He has a master's degree in comic book studies from the University of Dundee in Scotland. He's the co-creator of the Spanish language comics podcast Se Habla Comics and a social studies teacher in Brooklyn by day. So Ricky, please take it away.
Thank you. Just in case, if it's possible, could you mute so that we don't listen to each other twice?
Yep, I'm doing that right
now. Okay. So, welcome to the panel Making Comics, the Future of Representation. I am Ricardo Serrano, and our topic tonight is representation. First of all, thank you, Anna and Spencer and Seton Hall University for making all of this happen. I couldn't be happier to be moderating this here with you guys today. So let's get started. The battle for representation, and it has been a battle, has been a particularly rough one for Latino, Latina, and Latinx creators in recent years. Often changes in this realm tend to be fought from the bottom and take to the path of forcing the mainstream to adapt to our community's needs in pop culture. Comics has been one of the most fascinating battlegrounds in this regard, and our panel tonight is going to be strong evidence of that. The innate desire to see ourselves leading stories of all kinds within spaces usually dominated by white male perspectives has resulted in a shift for diversity that's definitely opening up the playing field for Latino, Latina, and Latinx voices. And yet, this hasn't necessarily been the case when thinking about starting roles for Latinos characters, not to the degree that we've already had hoped to achieve, or to the point that we want to be in terms of these kinds of representations. For instance, Cisco Ramon in Flash eventually becomes a vibe, a metahuman with the power to manipulate the vibrational energy of reality, and is a key character in the CW series. But he's not Flash, the lead character. While Cisco's role shouldn't be minimized for this, one of the reasons Cisco isn't seen as a potential lead can be due to his lack of presence in the comics world. He doesn't have his own dedicated comic book series running presently. He has had comic book series limited at least before, but right now he doesn't, which means that there's no explicit multimedia presence tied to that character. Nor has there been much in terms of new content for him as well in recent years. All of this to say, there's progress, but there's also ample space for wider and more meaningful representation. Miles Morales' Spider-Man, on the other hand, has become the hero of his story, as evidenced in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, a movie I think everyone in this world and others have seen. The movie was a success, and it did tip the scales in favor of Latino, Latina, and Latinx representation in the mainstream. But in this case, and this is interesting, the original comic, worked on by several high-profile creative teams, but originally created by Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli, had a lot to do with the movie's impact, as Morales has been embraced by fans not just as the second Spider-Man or the other Spider-Man, but as a fully legitimate Spider-Man in his own right. The movie stood on the shoulders of a giant comic in this success story, speaking to the power multiple media representations of the same character play in getting more people invested in. Miles Morales will next be seeing helm in his own video game on PlayStation 5, another outlet for representation that needs further discussion and maybe another panel in the near future. But all of this to say, we're in an important phase for representation. A lot is riding on how we express ourselves in our current time. The struggle for it continues, but there has been a lot of ground already covered and claimed. Now, we must look to the future towards next steps. And that is why we are here tonight. I would like to now give the panelists the chance to introduce themselves. Please be mindful of time. Try to shoot at least for 1 minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes per turn. I know how hard that is going to be, but at least let's try to be fair so that everyone can get their word in. So, as if this were an elevator pitch on your career, tell us, as a Latino, why comics? Let's start with Hector Rodriguez, creator of El Peso Hero. Can you give us like your elevator pitch as to what you've done comics-wise your entire career? You know, something short.
Yes, definitely. Hi, my name is Hector Rodriguez. I'm the creator of the Latinx comic book series El Peso Hero. I've been doing El Peso Hero for close to 10 years. So next year will be the 10th year anniversary. So El Peso Hero is about a norteño, Mexican-American superhero dealing with a lot of the issues from the border, from the Southwest, dealing with border issues, as well as, the discrimination, as well as just a lot of the cultural world that the Southwest is, the borderland. And so it's been a ongoing series with a lot of publicity, a lot of great stories based on the Southwest, as well as, we've hit stories with the detention facilities, as well as the issue with unaccompanied minors. And then in 2015, after back then President candidate Donald Trump announced his candidacy, we did an homage cover of Captain America punching Hitler. And then we were the first ones. We can say that. We can claim we were the first ones. Summer 2015, before Marvel, before the other indies got in on it. And so just because we have a great pulse, and so in the community here, I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I was also born in Eagle Pass in the border. And also, I'm also co-founder of Texas Latino Comic Con. We just had our 4th show, digital, first time, great turnout, a lot of great artists. And so it's something that it's something we give back to our community, as well as we lift up voices too. A lot of art, a lot of upcoming artists, writers that need that space to be lifted up. And it's an amazing free event. And there are only a couple of Latinx-based comic book shows in our country right now, but we're the ones in Texas.
Yeah, you guys are leading in terms of Latino representation in the convention scene, and really happy to hear that the digital version came out pretty well. Fabian, up next.
Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Fabian Nicieza. I've been in the comics industry for 35 years. Started working at Marvel. Geez, I just said I've been in the comic industry for 35 years. Sorry. Every time I say something like that, I have to stop and cry. I worked on staff at Marvel starting in 1985. Started freelance writing for them at the same time as I was on staff. I have written basically every mainstream comic book character that Marvel or DC has published. I've also been an editor on a lot of licensed projects. I've been an editor-in-chief, a president, and a publisher of a small company in the 90s called Acclaim. I've done intellectual property management for Hollywood studios and video game companies for over 20 years now, including on some pretty gigantic franchises for Hollywood. And just last year, I sold my first novel called Suburban Dicks, which will be coming out in 2021. So over the course of 35 years, I've done kind of a little bit of everything on the business side and the freelance side.
Okay, excellent. Up next, Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez.
So my name is Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez. I entered into the space of producing and publishing comic books about 7 years ago, when I initially started working with Darryl McDaniels of Run DMC, because he wanted to get into comic books. So I started producing books. Before then, my experience with comics was actually as a curator, as I had curated some exhibitions with Marvel's Joe Quesada, and worked with also with Axel Alonso, but I never actually considered moving into the space formally until I started working with Darryl McDaniels. That gave me some professional experience and allowed me to kind of like parlay a lot of the relationships that I had in the industry to actually start doing my own production work. And it was actually in 2015 when I became very well aware of the humanitarian crisis affecting Puerto Rico with the debt crisis, an $80 billion debt that the island had amassed, which is intrinsically linked to the island's colonial status. And it occurred to me at that point that aside from financial media news outlets, no one was actually discussing this. In an area that media was dominated by superhero genre, I thought to myself, well, perhaps if I entered into this space as a graphic novelist for the first time, then maybe I can actually engage people in a discourse about what's really happening in Puerto Rico. And that's really where La Uriqueña took off for me. It was an idea, it was kind of like a what if, and it evolved into what is now a 4-year project that involves philanthropic work in Puerto Rico. So far, we've awarded $165,000 in grants to nonprofit organizations in Puerto Rico. We're possibly the only graphic novel publishing company that's intrinsically linked with philanthropic work. We're dedicated through the publishing of our work to really engage readers and audiences in an honest discourse around the decolonization of Puerto Rico. But I also navigate the space as a nerd who loves comic books and loves the genre and the world that comics actually present. But I have a background as an activist, so I stand to also challenge the industry that actually appropriates narratives centered around social justice, but doesn't actually engage in any actual social change outside of the actual full-color panels that are created. Therefore, these icons that we grow up with become much more corporate brands than they actually do become movements or icons that actually engage people in actually making a difference. Publishing companies are pretty much producing content. So if someone goes from Peter Parker to Miles Morales, it's like Adidas going from Run DMC to Pharrell Williams to Kanye. It's a brand, and it's just passing from one hat to another person. So I entered into the space to produce comic books to truly look at a way of creating an honest discourse, to also engage in telling stories around history that oftentimes, for the most part, is not discussed. When you're looking at a nation like Puerto Rico and its colonial history, because of the colony of the United States, Puerto Rico's own history is suppressed. Puerto Rico's own history is actually erased. And a lot of the work that we're committed to with our series is to do just that. We kind of like toggle the line of the island being a colony, because if it is a colony and the 3 million people on the island do have U.S. citizenship, then everything that happens in Puerto Rico is also part of American history and should be discussed and should be introduced into a larger conversation when you're looking at what is representation. There are many stories and many kind of like places that I draw inspiration from, and that's what I continue to do with my work.
And last but not least, Henry.
I started in comics at Marvel. I did what everybody else did, send out their samples, 300 copies. Todd McFarlane has a famous story where he sent out 300 submissions. Finally, they gave him a job to shut him up. So that's what happened. Marvel put me on Morbius. I finished up an issue of Morbius. Then I went on to work on Ghost Rider Blaze, Spirits of Vengeance, which is one of the Kubert's jobs. And then Blaze, which was a Larry Hama book. And dear God, I'm so blessed to have been able to work with Larry Hama. And that was it. So that was the beginning. And then the big Marvel comic book bubble exploded. And then I did independence from then on. But my main source of income has always been advertising. And but thank goodness, all that work I did back in late '97 has gotten attention, and I'm doing work and getting commissions, and I'm very blessed. So that's my history in comics.
I want to start with Hector. Your comic book, El Peso Hero, deals with border justice, as you explained in your introduction, and it looks at all these problems that a Luke Cage-like superhero with indestructible skin and super strength has decided to take on, right? So even though the inspirations are there, you do make your hero be very specific to the Latino experience. So my first question is, what things are you aware of when taking storylines from vision to reality within the Latino experience? What things do you want to make sure are in there?
Definitely, I believe within the Bodo world, it's it's a cross-cultural bridge between worlds and history. And one of the great things that I also love doing with El Peso Hero is focusing on the setting, the world, the music, the food, those rich textures that, growing up, I'm a huge consumer of comics myself. I mean, I have my backlog, I have my long stacks, I have comics around top of my posters lined up. And so I've always been drawn to the medium, either from historietas, from the knockoff El Santo back, and also to, consuming the grindhouse Mexican cinema with Los Hermanos Almada, those action flicks. And so bringing those cultural sensitivities, as well as giving nods to maybe the golden age of Mexican cinema as well, to Tigres del Norte by lyrics, sprinkling some lyrics, that are connected towards the situation that's going on. But and so I tend to draw from a lot of cultural aspects that I try to bring that world to life, and it's such a very limited panel, right? And so that's my as a writer, currently I am focusing on writing. I did the art for the El Peso Hero, the Essentials, our COVID issue, March. Got some headlines. And that just where El Peso Hero basically takes a back seat and give to the essential heroes, the essential workers. So I draw from the history, the cultural sensitivities when I'm writing, as well as I'm also an educator too here in Dallas area, and so I think I'm very involved in the community as well. And so it's very important to have a pulse in the community. And when you draw upon some of the issues that a lot of families are going through with, being of, your citizenship is in limbo, with our DACA recipients that are, those stressors are there for the, and so the raids, and so all those things, affect within our community. And so we were doing a Peso Hero Voter Stories, which dealt with the issue of unaccompanied minors across in 2014. And And we knew about those detention facilities back then as well. But, you know, sometimes real life takes a grimmer, darker, where we had to switch gears and reflect that in some of the latest stories. Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, that's something very interesting that you mentioned in your introduction and you touched upon here. Earlier, you called the border stories part of like the border world. So it kind of reminded me of the universes we now have within everything now because Marvel movies have made them so trendy. Do you kind of see that, like the border stories that you create as a kind of its own kind of border universe?
I say yes. Even, you know, growing up, it always felt to me that I was living in my own world, you know, especially in north of Mexico, Southwest. That history, that relationship is different than Central Mexico, or, you know, or you're talking the East Coast or North of the United States. It's that relationship is there's a lot of history, rich history with colonialism as well. You know, with a lot of the indigenous roots as well in the Southwest, and mestizaje, as they call it too in Mexico, right? So you're right. It is its own world, and there are you know, creators out there like Javier Hernandez, creator of El Muerto. You know, that is our West Coast, our primos in the West Coast. You know, that dabble to some of that.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Now we have the first that I know of border universe that we can actually create more characters and more stories within. Within those same lines, Edgardo, if you can hear me as the creator of one of the most successful Latina superheroes in current times, La Borinqueña, right? What was something you felt had to make it into the character and her story, particularly because she also represents a universe of her own where something as powerful as Puerto Rican identity basically colors all of it?
It's a big question. I think, well, what I will say is that it's interesting because what I found myself in the space of publishing La Borinqueña are a few items, right? And then I independently published this series, which means that I published the series based on the resources that I'm able to recoup. So there isn't a major corporation that is giving me a new budget every quarter or putting me in touch with a marketing or publicity team. It's pretty much everything that you see that goes out there happens literally in this little office that I'm sitting in right now. And between myself and my compañera, we pretty much operate the series through our independent design studio. She's a graphic designer, but she's also oversees our philanthropic work as the director of our grants program. I write, I produce, but I also find myself in a space at the position of being an advocate. With my background as a community organizer, activist, and teacher, it's kind of like evolved into this space. So therefore, in the 4 years that I've been working on La Borinqueña, I've only published 3 books. The first book published in December 2016. The second book, which was the anthology with that featured DC comic characters, in May of 2018, and then the month after that, issue number 2 of La Borinqueña. So we have published a new book in around like 2.5 years now, ¿verdad? So we're in the process of publishing our 3rd book, which we're hoping to put out by the end of this year. But even that comes with like the reality, because we work with artists through our studio that are also freelancing. And I know people on this panel who are actually are in the publishing space, particularly someone like Fabian, for example. When you have the muscle of Marvel, which is constantly kind of like the brand recognition, the budget, et cetera, you can hold people accountable and be like, I need this cover by Monday. And you get that cover by Monday. That's not the same space when you're working in an independent world. Because I need this cover by Monday, and what usually you can hear from sometimes is like, well, I'm finishing up this book for Marvel or for Image or for this, and you're literally pushed down the list. So one of the challenging things that I see as an independent publisher is how to move beyond just publishing the books. So now we move into the space of activism. We move into the space of advocacy, right? So we have not, as storytellers, fleshed out an entire universe per se with multiple characters, you know, and we do a lot of appearances and talks, and people will say, oh, is it going to be like Quisqueyana? Are you going to do La Mexicana? What about La Peruana? And I'm like, that sounds all great, but, you know, we're just making one book when we get the resources to do that book. But for us in publishing this book, important thing that we try to put into the storytelling is an incredible sense of familiarity and universality, right? She eats sancocho. She rides her bike. She has asthma. She's an Afro-Latina. At being an Afro-Latina, she finds herself in commonality with the entire African diaspora, which is not only Latinx people, but also Caribbean people, also African Americans, also continental Africans, right? And entonces, when you have this level of familiarity, what you actually end up doing is you focus the best that you can to tell really good stories, but at the same time, make an effort to do a story that is filling the blanks, is filling the spaces of what popular culture has left void for 82 years that superhero comic books have been around, right? Like you open this conversation, this is a narrative, this is a genre that's populated by white male narrative. So when you're doing something like La Boriqueña, you have to do things that are organic to being Latinx. So what's organic to being Latinx? Code switching between English and Spanish, not putting Spanish so-called words in brackets or kind of like putting a translation and a caption on the bottom, but literally code switching from one language to the next. You can't do that at a major publishing company. When I did my first book at Marvel, it took 2 weeks to get an approval for Groot to just say, yo soy Groot. You know, and there was so much more I wanted to say in the book, but they were like, no, we don't usually do that. We have to caption it. It's not going to fit. So in the book, I think the one thing we focus on, as opposed to like universe building, is really familiarity. And also, one of the key things I'm very, very aware of, it's like a very multifaceted approach to this storytelling that we do, is that Puerto Rico is not Wakanda. Puerto Rico is not Themyscira. It's a real place. So I do the best that I can to show all these amazing real places. And it's fascinating when I hear back from people on social media saying, mira, llegué a Cueva Ventana, acá en Arecibo. This is amazing. This is the first time I've seen this, and it was actually something I learned from your comic book. Or they go to the bioluminescent bays, or they end up in El Yunque, or they say, mira, pasamos la semana pasada en los kioscos como salió en la página de La Borinqueña. And that to me is something that's powerful, because one of the things I try to do beyond raising awareness to social issues is really make Puerto Rico a viable place that people can actually visit, that people can actually experience, that people can actually see. And it's amazing when people do get that from the book, from just a simple little book. They can get that level of familiarity, and it's become something that is cross-generation. And finally, the other thing I enjoy about this book, and I learned this from doing these events and also seeing the analytics that come back from our sales, is that we're tapping into a demographic that's never been tapped into before, which is primarily women, young women, women who are parents, women who are abuelas. When men come to my table, more oftentimes they're buying comic books for their mom or for their abuela or for their tía. Mira, tía, llegué a la mesa de Edgardo, ¿qué es lo que tú quieres? And they just literally just start ordering stuff. So it's something that's definitely filling the void. And, you know, some studios have referred to our project as too niche, pero pa'l carajo con ello, because I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's the attitude that we need to have, especially when dealing with representation. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that bigger companies tend to favor universality more than familiarity, as you very well said, Edgardo. Which kind of leads into my question to Fabienne. As a writer who has worked with the big two, Marvel and DC, how much creative freedom, Fabienne, do you feel is given in stories and characters that have massive followings that you have worked on? Have you felt as if you had the freedom to maybe tailor them a little bit into like your own experiences?
I think it's honestly an unanswerable question, because the freedom is really dependent on the relationship you have with your editor. It's dependent on the interest the company has in that specific character, and it's the biggest. aspect of the challenge of a question like that is your definition of the word freedom. Okay,
Right.
there are way too many creative people who think freedom means the right to do anything they want to do creatively, and that's not true, especially if you're working on characters that are owned by a major corporation. It's kind of silly to think otherwise. And just for the record, Edgardo, you tell a freelancer from Marvel, if you're a Marvel or DC editor, you tell a freelancer you need that cover on Monday, you ain't getting it on Monday. Because artists are going to be late no matter what. But back to the question. I think that you have to have a certain sense of self-awareness and a certain sense of understanding of the parameters of the work that you're doing for who you are doing it for. Okay, so you can have, I have a tremendous amount of creative freedom in quotation marks around the book I'm writing. It's my copyright, it's my book, and a publishing company decides if they want to buy it or not. I understand fully that I have less creative freedom around writing Spider-Man. All right, but the third comic I ever sold in my career was getting Peter Parker drunk in a comic book by accident. He gets drunk at a party to the point where it turned into a hashtag on Twitter where they meet every Saturday night, Drunk Pete hashtag, and because they remember the comic from when they were kids. So that in and of itself had to be approved by the editor and the editor-in-chief, and neither one of them had a problem with it at all based on the context of the story. On the other hand, I had a tremendous problem trying to make a character I wrote in the early 90s, Nomad, HIV positive, because everybody internally approved it, all the way up to the president of the company. But then guess what? They had stock issues they were worried about. So someone from Ron Perlman's company, his right-hand shark, man, came over to the company and talked to us about it and explained to me why we couldn't make Nomad HIV positive because it would damage the stock. So where's your creative freedom then, right? So it has to be a bit of a game that you play, but you have to understand the rules of the game. And way too many people simply don't understand the rules of the game because they haven't played the game on that particular playing field. And I'm lucky in that regard because I worked on staff at the company before I was writing for the company. So I got to learn the parameters before I even had to worry about what I could or couldn't do necessarily in a comic book. I understood already what I could or couldn't do in a comic book. That being said, as a writer, within the context of understanding, I was writing mainstream, fun, entertaining tripe for people that was going to sell hundreds and hundreds of thousands of copies. I always tried to push the envelope a little bit, and pretty much in every single thing I've ever written, I've tried to push the envelope a little bit within the company parameters.
And would you say within that same line of thought, especially with the superhero that was going to have was HIV positive, would you say that maybe we're asking too much of mainstream to deal with representation, and that maybe the answer is outside in the more independent companies?
Oh, well, yes and no. I don't think it's ever wrong to try to push for representation. I don't think that the story should be about representation. I think the representation should come from the use of characters and the stories you're telling of them. But by the same token, you're always going to get more ideologically pure or ideologically motivated content from independent publishing than you're ever going to get from mainstream publishers. That's just the reality, and it's always been a reality. The independents have always pushed the envelope more because they can. The truth of the matter is that companies can only do certain things to a certain extent. I've always been a believer from the inside and from the outside that they can do more they claim to be able to do, but even within that context, I understand that there are parameters. I just think that in mainstream comics, the diversity has to come from the desire of the creative people to want to show differentiation in the story content of color, of religious beliefs, of sexual orientation, of everything. And the only way to do that is by forming relationships that allow them to trust you, by being good enough that they trust you, and then by having readers follow it without an issue. And we have so much conversation going on now in the comics industry about social justice warriors and this and that and representation and diversity. And I just shrug my shoulders a lot because, you know, I look at a cover, New Warriors, you know, 51 from 1994 that had every skin color on the cover you can imagine, including blue, you know, and that was something I built over the course of 50 issues without an agenda. I just wanted it to look like every single street I walked down in Manhattan on the way to work. You know, I wanted it to be Sarah Palin's nightmare before I even knew a Sarah Palin existed. You know, and I'm trying to say something to a 12-year-old back then is really what it amounted to. I wasn't writing for anyone my age, and I certainly didn't expect that 30 years later those 12-year-olds would grow up to be a bunch of whining man boys who didn't get it at all. But you know, you have no control over that either. You know, you just got to keep telling the stories that you want to tell.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's an interesting point because sometimes you do have that debate play out in a very bad way, sometimes in Twitter, where it's not the best place to do these things from experience. But you do think about the role mainstream has in it. We're sometimes asking a little bit too much from it. And I think that's where my question for Henry, if he's still able to be still here, Henry?
If you can hear me, I was told to take my headphones off. Can you hear me?
Okay, we can. Don't touch anything. You're perfect. From your experience, how do you think creators kind of balance the public perception, right? What we expect, but from Latino characters. Do you think that we're still looking at stereotypes, or are we trying to go beyond that?
Well, fortunately, we are able to get beyond the stereotypes because, as we all know, those of us who are Marvel kids, Johnny Blaze has always been a white guy. I mean, long blonde hair. But fortunately, because of the reinterpretation of Ghost Rider, we have a Latino character who's driving a car. Personally, I don't like the car, but that's just me. You know, I wish he was doing a motorcycle thing, but I did see the. At first, when I heard about it, I was like, "Ay, Dios mío, that's terrible. No, he needs to ride a motorcycle." But then I actually saw the TV series. Or was it Agents of
Yeah,
S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
My God, what a beautiful interpretation. I was so happy. I was like, of course, Ghost Rider can be anybody. It's like kind of a cloak you don on somebody, and it could be anyone. And when I actually saw the show, I loved it. And then this is the thing. People say, hey, TV shows, comics, they don't mix. But the TV show got me to look up the comics, and then I bought the comics. And they're beautiful. You know, the artwork is a little different from my taste because, you know, I have a different style. But my God, I loved it. And so there is plenty of room for reinterpretations of every character. And it doesn't matter. It could be Latino, it could be Muslim, it doesn't matter. And that's why I'm here, because I want to enforce and say that, yes, there are a lot of people complaining about social justice warriors and why is Iron Man a female now? And you know what? It doesn't matter. If you can tell a good story, and the race doesn't matter, because it's about the story, and that's the bottom line. You know.
Completely agree. That's I think one of the best ways I've heard it like put. Like the fact that the story guides up to a point the representation, right? Like how much you can get out of representation based on the story and how we kind of acquire these the methods that we use to get to these comics. And so for Hector, this next question, your comic, El Peso here in particular, is available digitally online, which means that you've had to interact with digital audiences as well as everyone in the panel. And that has a more streamlined sense of access to your work, right? You don't have to like tell them, okay, go to this comic book store, wait until next Wednesday, cross your fingers that no one buys it before you, and then get it. So how has this changed your perception of comics, if at all? And do you think creator writers have adapted to this digital world well, or is there still much to do?
Well, it has definitely been a process. When I started with Peso Hero, summer of 2011, when I started releasing it, I actually started out as a webcomic. It started just because of even though beforehand I worked on, storyboards for indie films and such, during college. And so, I always had a Peso Hero, in the oven since 2003, just developing it and working on it. And it was summer 2011 that I released it as a webcomic. And that webcomic world, that format, it's hyper accessible. There's different even apps now that they're voted for webcomic content, and so and it's that medium is hugely diverse, and anybody that has a great story to tell can just do it themselves, and so after promoting that my webcomic, I decided to collect the first volume, which became the first issue of Peso Hero, releasing summer 2012. And that was and I was just doing just doing my independent doing the circuit, doing the comic con circuits, and just getting a grassroots following. And so if you do have a great story to tell, people will notice and naturally to it. And so producing a Peso Hero has always been a kind of a digital hand in hand. And I did the first 2 issues, and as a creator, I have a hybrid model, meaning that I work with pen and pencil inks, as well as using digital tools as well. Now, as a artist, I am working through just digital means at this moment, and so and so that as a small press, you're able to turn on a dime and create content on the fly. And especially if you have a team of artists that I do have, these covers are from Peso Hero books. And so there's different artists. You're able to redirect your team and have content out in a matter of weeks. If you're producing yourself, it's all on you. But it's, a lot of upcoming artists have been navigating that digital medium fairly well. I know out of my own friends, colleagues, some do, have, I guess, some reservations on the future of comics. And you're right, correct. I mean, holding there's nothing like holding an actual book, compared to something digitally. Well, there's pros and cons for both. You can take out your phone and get on, Comixology and be reading comics late at night in bed with lights are off, and so, but when there's nothing, I mean, physical medium, of course, there's something very powerful of holding that book, you owning that story, owning that character, especially for younger audiences or those upcoming readers. It's something that is so they have a sense of ownership to that book.
That's interesting. So, if you would recommend younger audiences or first-time comic readers start with the physical and maybe then transition into digital?
Right, I do. I mean, when I'm doing school visits, yeah, it's through physical books, and so and it's the traditional medium that is tried and true. And I mean, and no, not to give them credit. A lot of let's say middle school, 4th, 5th graders are very tech savvy, and so they're very familiar with the web comics and as well as digital comics, and they all have phones, and so that's actually a great venue to reach out towards younger audiences through digital too as well.
And that's It's an interesting point because and now Edgardo, you've tended to like really go for the physical product, and it does look like you put a lot of thought into it because it's a very beautiful shiny cover, pages feel crisp. So in terms of looking at the digital world for La Borinqueña? Do you think they can coexist, or would you rather La Borinqueña stay with the physical?
Do you guys still hear me? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason I couldn't hear you guys on the phone. I love, I mean, I listen to what everyone is saying, and I think Hector comes from an interesting place as an educator, right? Because he's able, and you too, because when you're in the space of working with younger people, you know, it's an intergenerational exchange experience, right? And you see when technology can be helpful and when technology can actually be distracting. You know, giving a device to a very young child, you know, they can easily like minimize the window they're looking at and move on to something else. You know what I mean? Or just easily like swipe away. But there's something still magical about physically holding a book in your hand. Before I started publishing comic books, and I still am, I'm a creative director, I'm a graphic designer. I love the smell of books when they come right back from a printer. You know, I love seeing my books in my cabinets. You see what I'm saying? So I can physically see the quality of them. I geek out every time I get a new print. We just recently went perfect bound for our second issue, right? And I geeked out about that because I was like, oh man, I have a perfect bound spine, because when I first started publishing, everything was saddle stitched to save money, but then we found a printer that could actually do everything perfect bound. So there's something that can be said about physically having a book in your hand, because you can physically share it with somebody. You know, you can pass it along to somebody. There's something magical when a box is open and you open up that box and there's something in there. I don't think I don't know if that same kind of like excitement comes from an email, a text, or a like, or something in your DM box, you know. But I work with the Penn Faulkner Foundation in Washington, D.C., and they purchase hundreds of copies of La Borinqueña and distribute the books for free throughout the public school district in Washington, D.C. And it's amazing to see young people that are overwhelmingly not Puerto Rican really enjoy the physical book in their hand. And one of the projects that I'm working on, literally I've been like working on it for the last few weeks. But before the end of this year, we're going to be releasing a record. So it's actually going to be the first time that I actually write a song that's going to be pressed on vinyl, working with multi-Grammy award-winning legend Eddie Palmieri and DJ Stretch and Babito to recreate the song Que Bonita Bandera. And since I'm a child of the 70s, I remember when Marvel put out comic books that came with records, right? And it was just, the comic book was a little bit bigger than, so you could have like a vinyl record inside. And we're navigating this conversation about how we're going to get it out there. Yeah, we're going to have a digital distribution, obviously, because of the song. So what do we do to entice people to buy the physical book? Rather, the physical record, right? Babito was like, let's put La Borinqueña artwork on the actual vinyl. Boom, it becomes a collectible. And then Bob was like, why don't we make a special edition La Borinqueña comic book that just talks about the history of the Puerto Rican flag? Boom, I have more work on my plate. But now it was like an amazing idea, because now we get to entice people to actually get something physical, whether they have a vinyl record player or not. So there's como te digo, there's a market for it, right? Because then people can debate, is it that is a generational thing that people 40s and 50s and older that only like vinyl and books, because younger people also like it. I mean, you actually see a trend now amongst millennials that are like into VHS, into like vinyl records. So there's a market for everyone, and I think I'm able to see the success of this project through the printing of it than I could if it was digital. You know, I mean, just the first issue alone, we've already printed like close to 20,000 copies already. And that's something that's magical that we were able to do independently. And the fact that we do this independently also means that we set our own price point. You know, if this was a Marvel book with all of its ads, could easily sell this for like $5 or $6. I sell these for $20 and I sell them. They actually do sell. But I really do love having the books physically. It is something magical when somebody asks for them to be personalized for their tia or for their daughter or for their family members, and even actually before this conversation started, Anna actually texted me, emailed me a picture of one of my books that was autographed for Priscilla. So that's you can't get that. What are you gonna do? Have somebody freaking sign your telephone? Get out of here with that. You know what I'm saying? That's not that. Get out of here, man. That's not gonna work, man. You can't take that experience. When you meet somebody, you can selfie it, but then where the hell did that picture go? But if you actually have something physical, you could actually frame it. You could put it in your library. You put it on your stand, and you can pull it out. And you can be like, yo, there was this one time I got this. You can't do that with something digital. What are you gonna do with something digital? Scroll through your phone. Espérate un momentito. I know it's here somewhere. Un momentito más. It's somewhere. Pa'l carajo. Forget it. I can't find it. What were we talking about? Espérate. Somebody just texted me. You can't even do that. You get distracted. What was I looking for on my phone? I can't even remember anymore. You know what I mean? So that's my response.
That's something I appreciated from Hector's response, that the physical does at least give you that initial sense of how the comic works and how it moves and how it basically lives and breathes. And I think that's something the physical product that you put out captures very, very, very well. And through that, actually, before I get to the next question, I just wanted to point out Janisha Romero here in the chat says something really interesting. It's, despite its usual fantasy nature, comics make being a hero a very accessible thing to aspire to. And I think that kind of speaks to the power of representation right there beautifully. You do get these kinds of heroes that become kind of like avatars that you can see yourself in, and that you can basically, aspire to be in order to make the changes that maybe the superhero in the comic book does on their own. I was actually wondering, how do you, Edgardo, get feedback from students saying specifically why they want to be like La Borinqueña or something along those lines?
The kind of feedback that I get overwhelmingly is particularly from Afro-Latinx students, right? Because there's such an underrepresentation of people from the African diaspora in comics, and I'm a light-skinned Puerto Rican. I can grow up being Peter Parker with brown hair and brown eyes and be like, se parece a mí, you know what I mean? Because sí, se parece a mí, you know what I'm saying? Pero does he look like my tío? Does she look like my prima? You know what I mean? That's what it is. Because like, even though I look like this, the rest of my family doesn't look like me. You know what I mean? So overwhelmingly, what we get is this kind of like response where people will like flip through the pages, and even like, because it's an Afro-Latin character, hair is such an important concept that people don't freaking get. One of my good friends, Mike Hawthorne, is one of the most like prolific illustrators right now at Marvel. Bounced from like Deadpool to Thor to Superior Spider-Man. I think he's doing Daredevil now, right? Boricua, with a name like Hawthorne, imagínate. But he told me an amazing story that he was doing this one story and illustrating the character of Afro-descendiente, right? And dude had half of his hair in cornrows and the other half was, undone, which is mad natural. You know what I mean? You're either undoing your braids or you're haven't finished it. And the editor was like, "What is this?" And Mike is having to explain, and the editor was like, "I don't get this." And the editor had him completely redraw the image because the editor didn't get it, because the lens and the gatekeeper at most mainstream publishers are white men, and white men are limited by their circle of white experience, and their circle of white experience tends to be what they deem as cultural literacy, what they deem as the cultural standards, como se dice, the bar. ¿Tú entiendes? So when La Borinqueña in the same issue could have her hair in box braids, or have it up in an afro puff, or have it blown out straight, or have it like thick and curly. That, if you're not around people of color, if you're not a person of color yourself, will go right. Let me just review. If you're white, that shit most of the time will go right over your head. But those little things, those little details in just one book, overwhelmingly people like go like crazy about. They're like, oh my God, I love this. Oh my God, she's about to go out with her girl. Of course she's gonna blow out her hair. That's so beautiful. And it's like those little things are so, como se dice, normal to us, pero it's not seen as normal in mainstream storytelling. It's not seen as normal in mainstream imagery. And that really is what I feel is why the book resonates and is successful for what it is, because children legitimately see themselves. And if there's,
Exactly.
and I've gotten it from Nicaraguan girls, I've gotten it from Honduran girls, I've gotten it from young women that are Trinidadian. Like this, just an amazing outpouring. One of our most successful events is the Black Comic Book Festival. Here in New York City, we don't have any Latin comic events. You know, I keep telling Hector what's going on with that, right? But in New York City, we have the Black Comic Book Festival. We have like two of them. We have one at Brooklyn Academy of Music, and we have one at the Schomburg Center. Ironically, the Schomburg Center is founded by and named after. And I'm in that space, and the book does incredibly well because when people come to the table, they see a Black woman. They see a woman that looks like themselves. And if we talk about the space being dominated by white male narratives, let's also be real. It's dominated by male narratives, period. So overwhelmingly, you don't even see women represented in this genre. So when somebody comes by my table and they see this action figure, this figure right there, they're like, "Ay, mami, yo quiero eso, mom, I want to get that." So it immediately, the representation isn't just about, como se dice, ethnicity or skin color. It's also about gender. You know what I'm saying? It's like women aren't even seeing themselves in this genre, and women are almost oftentimes not even considered when narratives and books are published. And and to me, it wasn't even like, oh, we're gonna publish this book because we want to appeal to women. It wasn't even that at all. It's just like, this is what it's gonna be. You know?
Exactly. And something that's very interesting about that, and I'm moving to Henry now, the multimedia aspect of comics, right? That they're so easy to adapt to other mediums once you have the character well established. Your experience with Heroic Publishing, which has got a huge following, and it has its own story and its own universes. But they also have their own video games, their own card games. They've branched out, and people get to know these characters in a different space. So how do you think these comics that are trying to do more with representation, how do you think we get more people from other minority markets or from other communities to read them and get into them?
Oh, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, Heroic is every company is out to make money. So Heroic is not exactly reaching out to specific groups, ethnic groups. But the reason I'm working for them is because I grew up with this love of superhero comics, teams. I'm a Marvel kid, and they gave me the opportunity to do that. I promise you, I squeeze in as many ethnic characters as I can. But bottom line is they're out to make money, and that specific publishing company feels that they're doing the right thing. But I always squeeze in, when I can, ethnic characters. But what I was actually texting Anna before you said Henry. I was like, oh my God, I got to get back. But we need to. Fabian touched upon this, and we both come from the mainstream, and part of me agrees with him, but then there's there's this Latino side of me that says, we need to squeeze in a little bit of ethnic characters in there. So yeah, we have a responsibility to the publisher, but also when we can, not intentionally, but I'm aware that there are people that are not represented in modern day comics, but I'm not like overly sensitive to it. It's just like, to me, I grew up, I went to the High School of Art and Design, and that school was completely, there was no ethnicity acknowledged. We all, it was just like, it's like the UN of high school. So everything that I did, there was nothing ethnic involved. It's like, okay, so I drew this character and he happens to be Afro-American or Cubano, like myself. And, you know, we just drew the characters. The stories were what were important. But nowadays, we do need to be aware of representation. I know there are a lot of people complaining, oh, politics and social justice warriors, but what we forget is that Marvel and, you know, DC back in the day, especially Green Lantern, Green Arrow, but I'm specifically addressing Marvel. There's always been this social aspect to comics, and like the old timers like ourselves. Oh, well, not me specifically, but I go, my local comic book shop is like run by unfortunately, you know, like an 80-year-old guy. And why do we need to bring in a Muslim Miss Marvel, you know, that kind of thing. But it's like, no, it's not about that. Let's tell a story. And, you know, we can have our classic superheroes. You know, unfortunately, Captain Marvel died, and that's it. But you know, no reason to bring in these female, these minority characters and tell new stories. That's all. That's where I'm coming from. And like I told Anna earlier today, my main point was not that. My main point was this. Okay, so we have these new characters. We have these new interpretations. But my concern is why is a certain group angry about that? You know, like let's say, okay, we have our female Muslim Captain Marvel. So then people are outraged. Why? That's a new storyline. That's a new character. So let's explore that. Let's enjoy it. We can't explore, you know, white guy Captain Marvel because he's dead. But you know, there's female Captain Marvel, which I enjoyed the film version. I loved. I had no issue with that, but a lot of people did because they're thinking back to the old dead white guy. And I'm sorry if this is controversial, folks, but you know, it is what it is. Let's enjoy the stories. Let's enjoy new interpretations of characters. And if they're dead, they're dead. Okay, and we can move on.
I think that's something that
Go ahead.
I was really thinking about in terms of how Fabian was touching upon the mainstream and what its role is versus the independents that have more freedom. And I'll get back to you on that point. But Fabian,
and he's right.
How do you,
he's wrong. He's right, but yeah, there are different takes on this issue. But go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So Fabian, you're obviously in a unique position to use these highly recognizable characters to get a message across. But often these things create more controversies than the actual author or artist is intending. In terms of representation, do you think all comics have to take a stance, or is it story first and then see how everything else mixes in together?
I don't think it's the horse or the cart. I think you need both the horse and the cart. I tell stories and I try to have accurate representation in the stories I tell. Simple as that. I mean, I don't mean to belittle the topic. I just feel that it's incumbent on individual storytellers to tell the stories they want to tell, period. And then it's incumbent on the platform through which you are telling it, whatever the medium is, and in this particular case, we're talking comics, but just as importantly, who you are delivering that content to So the difference between publishing something on your own or independently or publishing something through Image is very different than publishing something through Marvel or DC. Inherently, it just is, and it always has been, and it always will be. The key to improving representation at the main companies really comes in improving the representation of the staffing at the main companies. All right. When I worked at Marvel from 1985 to 1995, we had more women in positions of as directors, as vice presidents, as heads of departments than they have women working there total now. So the truth of the matter is that in order to improve what it is you're looking to improve in the content of the comic books, the people who are making that content, which is not just the writers, the pencilers, the inkers, it's the editorial staff, it's the sales and marketing people, it's the promotional people, the licensing people, all of that. That's where you have to change. So how do you get a Ms. Marvel? How do you get Kamala to be a character that's become as popular as she's become? It's because internally there was an editor who was driven to try to do something new and different, and had the creative people who had the wherewithal to do it right. And I don't know how anyone feels. I love the book myself, so I'm going to speak highly of it. And it's been 10 years, I guess, roughly almost, since she's been around. So it doesn't happen overnight. It takes its time. You know, Deadpool's just this wonderful overnight success that has been around since 1992. You know, so the truth of the matter is that you have to have incentives internally as well as the right creative people externally in order to create a book. So Ms. Marvel has sold 500,000 copies in trade paperback form of the various volumes. That's a significant quantity of books featuring a character like this, quote in quotation marks, I say like this, that normally wouldn't appeal to the mainstream, man bookstore reader. All right. But clearly she has appealed to a lot of people who may not be going to the comic book shops, because the trade paperbacks are selling more mainstream through Amazon and bookstores, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that our job is to tell stories when we're being hired to tell stories. Okay. I'm a freelance writer. I've never not been a professional writer, in that I've never had the luxury until I wrote this book of writing kind of for myself, with no expectations of whether it was going to happen or not, right? Every other job I've ever had has been a paid job. So I don't know anything else other than that. So anything I've tried to do has always been within the context of knowing that I was being hired to do something for someone. Okay. So within that entire complicated issue, you have to juggle a lot of balls and keep a lot of things up in the air. And sometimes you're going to drop a ball or two. Other times you're going to juggle 6 or 7 and get everything you want out of it. That doesn't happen all the time. You just have to choose the right battles at the right time for the right reason. And that even then, it doesn't mean you're going to win the battle. But you need to have people who are encouraging you to fight those battles. So if you're talking about mainstream Marvel and DC, that really starts with the editorial level. And it really starts with the editor-in-chief and the publisher having a vested interest in trying to do that kind of material.
It's a tough fight. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a tough fight, but I think that's something that doesn't get as much mention as it should. The fact that having representation on the creator part is important, but you still have to make sure that everyone as a whole team, as a company, also has some sort of representation as well in it, so that it can actually respond to the needs of the public.
Right.
So, Hector, you have, again, this character that I love with your comic, and I'm wondering, now that you have this very good source of representation that a lot of people will be able to identify with, how do you think people will look at your character in the future? What do you think is going to be said of your hero?
Well, with Ignacio, El Peso Hero, also known as the Toro Pesado, I think that it's interesting, just because I've never started El Peso Hero as something to be political. I really wanted to tell a great story about, I was a border kid, And so I really wanted a superhero to eat menudo, eat pozole, eat tamales. You know,
Mhm.
I've never seen, Batman eat, some pozole, so I wanted to create my own. And so, I've had fans that are border patrol agents making great connections. Hey, especially because we do deal with some of the border violence too, as well in the books.
Mhm.
And so they make a lot of great connections. Something that, as the years go by, and next year will be at Peso Hero 10-year anniversary, we'll do a 3-arc story with called the Sicario War, which is going to be awesome. And so it's something that I would want them to connect also in a cultural level. I know that our the Latinx community, we're blessed that we're so diverse with different philosophies, language, just dialects, accents, and colors. But I guess for the Mexican Americans, Chicanos, Mexicans, Norteños, they see that within the books there's almost a moment in time of certain aspects of of history and cultural identity. I know that one of the stories and at Peso Hero La Patrona, we start off with the Mexican-American War, Los Niños Héroes, which is a great story on itself with the American invasion in Mexico City, and they're fighting for. And so, where there's some references to Pancho Villa, just little tidbits of history that historical representation is also important because a lot of our history is written by somebody else and not our own. So I like to tell some of that through some of the Peso Hero books as we continue on. And so it's something that, and truthfully, I've had some tough conversations from my own colleagues. And so some fans asking about the Peso Heroes, skin color too, why is he, why is he male? Why is he straight or gay? And so they try to pinpoint a lot more of his identity. And so I, in turn, say, well, just read the book, just read the book and see where it's going to take us. I hate spoilers, but, just read the book.
Well, that's an interesting question that leads into an audience question, especially in terms of when we speak about representation, who's actually being represented. So one of the questions that we found from the audience is, I feel like there's a lot of tokenism in popular media. You might get a character that's either a person of color or LGBTQ, but rarely one that's both. And often that part of their identity makes up most of their character and their personality. So as someone who's both brown and queer, it was really discouraging to never see characters that represented me growing up. Do you feel like that's still an issue in the comic industry? Let's start with Henry first, and then we'll move on to the other.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Can you do that again? I was
Yeah.
distracted.
The question is basically that we kind of focus on one type of representation, right? So if we're going to do a Latino, it's going to be a Latino, and there's no other play with any other identity, right?
Okay.
So sometimes we have a Black character that's just Black and not LGBTQ as well. And increasingly, that's becoming more of a problem that we don't see those mixes. Do you feel like that's an issue that the industry still has, or are we moving past that a little bit?
No, we still have it because honestly, this country, unfortunately, we're taking very slow steps, positive steps, but they're very slow. We're just, the comic book industry is notoriously left-leaning, so we're very accepting of minorities and gays, but I think this country is still not ready for cross-gender and sex-based identity. So there's a lot of progress that needs to be made on that front. So we need to represent everyone, and it not to be forced, but you tell a good story. Comics has always been about story. So let's tell a good story. And you know what? If that person is transgender or whatever aspect they come from, let's tell the story from their perspective. And hopefully it's subtle enough where no one's going to notice. And it's like, hey, and we're there. That's how I feel from that. So every person in this nation needs to be represented in comics because comics is pop culture, and comics eventually reach out and they become TV shows, as we learned, films, etc. So yes, I'm all for everyone being represented. I hope that answers the question.
I believe it does, but any case, you can still, as it's the same with all panelists, you can still type in messages in the chat and interact with the audience as you've already been doing beautifully.
People are typing, and I'm going to respond. So
there's a question.
Okay.
If anyone wants to take it from the chat, Dormisha, if I pronounce that correctly, is asking for what is your advice for an FT Qbert school student who is also working full-time to pay for school as far as finding motivation to continue his goal for Marvel? What do you think, Fabian? Can you take that one really quick?
Yeah, my recommendation is not to have a goal to work for a company, but to have a goal to get to create comics, period. If your desire is to get a chance to work for Marvel, chances are really good that that will happen if you're just creating comics that are good enough to get the attention of an editor who wants to buy that particular style of art. I think that more than ever in the industry, we have a generation of creators who understand that the better benefits for them creatively and financially may not lie with the mainstream companies, Marvel and DC. That certainly wasn't the case when I started, but I started, in the Jurassic era. So it's a very different world right now. And if I were trying to break into comics, I wouldn't have DC or Marvel as my main goal. I would try to be creating comics that give me an opportunity to try to sell something to Image and sell something through Image. I think that's me or someone else.
There's a little. Okay, now you can.
Sorry, we're good.
So I just think that I think that is the smarter play for yourself creatively and financially. That being said, if your goal is to work for Marvel and DC, you have a full-time job that's really, really hard, but you got to keep drawing. Simple as that. You got to try to produce a certain amount of pages a week, or a page a week, whatever it takes. But you have to do it because when the time comes, if you get that call, they're going to expect 20 pages out of you in 3 to 4 weeks, and unless you've practice to the point where you're comfortable being able to do that kind of workload, you're going to fail. So you don't want to fail your first time, up at bat. You don't want to strike out your first time up at bat because you never know. You may not get a second time up at bat through a company like Marvel or DC. And often you do, but that, I'm just saying that you have to be prepared. And yes, I got a full-time job. The last thing in the world I want to do is go home and then have to draw. You know what? I'm sorry, if you want to be a comic book artist, you got to go home and you got to draw, and that's what you have to do. So I encourage you to try to set goals for yourself that are reasonable and that you're able to make. Maybe a page a week that you do, after hours is a good starting point. And once you get to that point, try to get to a page and a half or 2 pages a week. Just train yourself to stay focused on the drawing. Even though, yes, you have a full-time job and it's kind of exhausting to do both. Listen, I had a full-time job at Marvel for all the years I was writing 6 books a month for them or 5 books a month. My brain, look, I lost all my hair. My brain was mush. But I'd be taking the train home from Manhattan, and I'd be writing on the train. And this was before the days of laptops. And I'd be working at nights until midnight, 1 in the morning, and getting up at 5:30 or 6 to get back into the office again. And I did that every day for like 4 or 5 years, you know. And the reason is because I knew that I may not get that chance again, and I had to take advantage of the opportunity I was being given, even though it was exhausting me. And it did. It exhausted me mentally, emotionally, in all ways. I was a mess after that. But it was the time. It was the time to get it done. So I did it.
Can I chime in? Can I chime in for a second?
Yeah, really quick.
All right, thanks. So really quick.
Wait, there's like an echo on your side.
There's 2 Henrys on my screen.
Oh, I think you're maybe logged in twice. So
just unmute one of them if you can, Henry.
okay, so we'll get back to Henry really quick because we're running out of time. I will say one thing really quick. I'm not nearly as awesome as the panelists here, but when we're covering comic book news that deals with characters that are trying to do something with representation, independent works get a lot of attention. So I completely agree with Fabian. Don't aim for Marvel or DC. If your work is good enough, you will get there, but make your own mark on the industry first. Okay, and then everything Fabian said, copy and paste it and put it on your wall as a poster and read it every day. Another interesting question that we have from the audience goes for Hector and Edgardo. Hector, really quick, the question is very simple. Have you heard a lot of negative feedback from people that don't believe you have to be doing Latino hero and that you don't have to mess with that type of representation? What have the naysayers said about your comics?
Well, a lot of the naysayers have been more political, you know, just I can say the alt-right, yeah. You know, all that, you know, but, you know, it's like, you know, but the funny thing is, I mean, they read something that kind of triggers something in their brain to like, wait a minute, that's different. But no, I mean, any negativity, you know, it's like when there's a Peso Hero news article, you know, Telemundo, Univision, or it was Texas Monthly, or, you know, you'll always have people that, you know, the haters. You always have the haters, but you just brush them off and keep on creating.
Yep, I think that's the best way to put it. Edgardo, have you had naysayers and how have you responded?
Have I had any naysayers? Not really. Imagínate. I don't. And if people are talking shit, I guess I'm not registering in my radar. You know. I think what I've been able to do with this work is truly create an audience that follows the book. People that know about La Borinqueña, they either know about La Borinqueña because they have physically picked up the book, or they have the T-shirt or the poster, or they just love the image and they make it their icon on there, or their avatar for their phone, or their social media accounts. And so I haven't had that space where I can say, oh man, how do I navigate this? And then one of the things I try to do with the character, particularly, and you know this, Ricardo, as a Puerto Rican, the two things you don't talk to Puerto Ricans about is baseball and politics. So what you don't want to do with this character is, I've always clearly said that she's a student. She's an undergraduate student, and she's also learning about the world as she's learning about history. And similar to what Hector said, you know, when people say certain things about his character or expect certain things about his work, he said, just read the book. And I tell you know, when people have been able to make a statement like, oh, independentita, and I'm like, well, you actually obviously haven't read the book, you know. And it's interesting when people can say certain things are controversial or not, but they're really speaking from a lack of education or a lack of history or a lack of context, you know. To say that the La Borinqueña is one thing, is to say that the Puerto Rican flag is one thing. The Puerto Rican flag literally comes in 3 shades of blue. navy blue, royal blue, and light blue. You know, and there's a reason why it comes in all those different shades of blue. It doesn't mean that it's been out in the sun too long and it's faded. So what I try to do with this work is really just cater to the audience that supports me. And I think being a philanthropist really helps me stay focused. You know what I mean? Really helps me stay validated, stay affirmed, because I'm not just doing this for the likes. I'm not doing this for the street cred or the followers. I'm doing this because I know that I'm making real impact in the lives of many people in Puerto Rico who are underserved and are doing amazing work and are truly the real superheroes that don't need capes to do the work that they're doing every day.
Exactly. And just before I forget, if you didn't have the naysayers from La Borinqueña, just really briefly, did you have them for your Groot story where you turned Groot into a Puerto Rican ceiba tree?
No, what's interesting is I don't understand how last week that 4-year-old story automatically picked up steam all over again. Screen Rant wrote an article. I got my first profile in GQ magazine, and I didn't even get a photo shoot from that, so I'm kind of a little bitter about that. All jokes aside, not even from that, I honestly that actually became something more than I expected, because the editors on that book were all white. There was so much shit that I knew was gonna go completely under their radar. They were so focused on the Thing, and they're so focused on Plant Man, and the fact that I made Plant Man sound like one of the activists that I grew up with, talking against gentrification. Nobody paid attention to the fact that I added Taínos to the canon of Marvel. Nobody realized that I rewrote Groot's origin by linking him to the Ceiba tree, because the focus was so on everything else, and because nobody, and this goes back to the earlier comment I made, and even Fabian mentions this a lot. The gatekeepers really cultivate the talent, the stories, the product that we see. They literally come in with their clique, their writers, their artists, and that's what you see. And they're coming in from their lens, they're coming in with their perspective and with their context, ¿verdad? So when I write this script and I'm mentioning the Ceiba tree and I'm mentioning Taínos, they don't know what the fuck that is. So that's going to go right over the radar. It's going to just zip over their heads. So when the book comes out, people are like, válgame, Cruz de Ponce, no, and then people it started picking up. By the time it picked up steam, it's already a Wikipedia article where talking, and it's hilarious. So it becomes bigger than that. And I knew to an extent that this was easily going to be my only shot at doing anything with Marvel, so I was just it's a short story, and I did that, and I immediately went into doing my own work. It's not even like I had a great career as writer for Marvel and I leveraged that to do my own creator-owned property at Image. No, I actually went and did something that no one's ever done before. Write a short story for an anthology, and automatically I start self-publishing my own books that end up becoming more successful for me and starting a philanthropic effort than I would have ever expected. So Groot tampoco gave me to this day, I still get a lot of little groups that people send me in the mail and stuff like that. Somebody actually one time gave me a group at the Puerto Rico Comic Con with a little baba, little straw hat, and that was but that was dope. That was really dope.
That is dope. Okay, so you guys did an excellent job in the introductions by keeping it short and sweet. I would like you to do it now for any final thoughts, anything that you guys didn't get to say and want to say really quickly so that we can start wrapping this up, even though I don't want to, because this has been a great conversation. So let's start with Henry. Final thoughts.
Hola, amigos. Final thoughts. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And as far as promotion, I've been working a long time, and my current project is Cult of Dracula, which with Richard Davis, who's it's a brand new interpretation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. You've never seen anything like this before, I promise you. So my work is out there. Just type in Dragon Brush Studio, and that's my company. And our book is Cult of Dracula. And that's that. And I'm always out there. Just type in Henry Martinez or Dragon Brush Studio, and I'm on all these social networking things, and I'm just learning this stuff. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity, guys, and bless you all, guys and ladies, and bless you all, and aprovecha y let's move forward. Okay.
Okay, gracias, Henry.
Okay.
Fabian, up next.
I'm up next. I want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to be involved in this, and great to meet all of you as well, and everything you guys are doing. I continue to write mainstream tripe for as many people as are willing to read it. Juggernaut is on sale now from Marvel Comics. Let me get Outrage is on Webtoon, which is one of those annoying digital comics that Gardo was talking about, which happens to have more readers than anything I've written for Marvel or DC in 25 years, but that's a whole nother discussion at Gardo at another time. And yes, I've actually signed phones already, so there you go. And my first novel, Suburban Dicks, will be coming out in 2021. Wait, I have a cover I'm not supposed to be showing you for that as well. And Suburban Dicks will be coming out. It's a sarcastic suburban mystery set in New Jersey and talking about diversity. The Argentinian immigrant writer writes a book whose two lead characters are a 34-year-old pregnant Caucasian Jewish woman and a 29-year-old Chinese American reporter. So those are my two main characters. I am neither Chinese American nor Jewish nor well, I'm tan, that's what I consider myself. So I'm semi-Caucasian, and I'm certainly not pregnant, although my stomach seems to be getting there. I hope everybody gives it a chance. It's an excellent opportunity for me, and it's been tremendous fun. And anybody who's read it so far has liked it, so I'm pretty pleased with all that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. And Hector?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Huge honor. If you want to follow all things Peso Hero, go to RioBravoComics.com. You could also follow on all the social media. For the latest and greatest, just Google Peso Hero, and you see there's a really great in-depth story, Texas Monthly Magazine, that recently came out too. So check that out. For Texas Latino Comic Con, you can also follow us on social media. And also, if you go to YouTube, you can go back and check out all the great panels we had on this last month at Texas Latino Comic Con. So check it out. Next year is 10 years of Peso Hero. Sicario War will be out next year. Next summer, we're going to be celebrating. Huge, big news, and more to come. Thank you.
Thank you. And Edgardo, last word.
Bueno, I just said everybody to follow me on social media. We've got a bunch of projects that we're going to put out before the end of this year, including the 125th anniversary of the Puerto Rican flag, re-release of the song Que Bonita Bandera on Warner Media. So we're super excited about that. It's going to be a comic book / 45 RPM vinyl single. And there's a few other projects that we're also trying to get kicked off before the end of the year. And most importantly, do not hesitate to use your power to vote. As the Latinx population in the U.S., we are right now the largest ethnic population in the country with 18%, and we need to make a difference. There are hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricanos who are now living in Florida, one of the major swing states, and these are Puerto Ricanos who don't have amnesia and remember how non-absorbent paper towels were. So I encourage everyone to make sure that you make a difference in this election. We've been very involved. We have a new public service announcement that's going to launch next week on Univision nationally, that's voiced by Rosario Dawson. So it's an animated La Boriqueña public service announcement. So we're moving into the space to do more advocacy and activism. Y como siempre, mi gente, pa'lante. Gracias.
Pa'lante indeed. All I'll say to sign off is read comics and make comics. And I guarantee you that I'll read them and write about them. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much. This was such a great conversation, and I literally could sit here until 10 p.m. Kind of like what Fabian said in our pre-call. We would be here for hours talking, about comic books and about all things representation and diversity. And I just want to say thank you to the Latino Institute team who worked very tirelessly on making this happen. And thank you to the audience who stayed with us through some technical difficulties at the end, but we found our swing. But to all the creators we were able to have on here tonight, thank you guys so much. Thank you for the work that you do. Your characters are the characters that we love and we adore and we subscribe to, and who we see ourselves as being a part of. So thank you guys so much for your expertise. And to everyone, have a wonderful night. And please, our hope is for next year to do this in person at Seton Hall University. So keep an eye out for that. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Get home safe.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ricky. Have a good night, everybody.
Stay safe. Hey, you good night.
Thanks, everybody.